Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. Now, if you guys did not see my recent update on what my newest topic is going to be, well, here's your answer today. We are going to be looking into the topic, what if Lori survived? Now, those of you who did see my update, know the extreme disregard that I have for the character Lori, and I'm sure a lot of you can concur with my thoughts on this character and how unlikable that she was. But this isn't to hate on Lori. This is to basically tell her story, surviving her pregnancy and becoming a likable character, actually making something more of herself than her canon counterpart from the original Walking Dead. Well, with all that out of the way, let's set the scene for this tale. Everything in The Walking Dead goes the same, up until Lori, Carl, and Maggie are all in the separate part of the prison, and Lori is about to give birth. But this time, through sheer luck and good fortune, I'm not saying this to be, silly or anything, but I'm just saying, in Walking Dead's perspective, Lori survives the pregnancy. Judith's still born safely, and together, Carl holding Lori, because even though she survives, she's still in great pain. Yeah. Anyways, they both make it out with Maggie and Judith, obviously, and pretty much go the same exact route that Carl, Maggie, and Judith did in the original story. Nothing really changes besides Lori being there. Anyways, Maggie's holding the baby like before because Carl's trying to make sure that his mother doesn't die because she's still in extreme pain. And when Rick sees them all, he's happy to see Carl, Lori, and everybody that's safe. And he's also very happy and shocked at the revelation of his newborn daughter, Judith. And he doesn't go crazy this time because Lori's around. Afterwards, Rick and Lori, this is their moment to finally, talk. Not their shrill, one-sided conversations, not some meaningless gibber. This is a conversation that the two need to have about solving their differences, talking about their past, fixing problems. Rick openly admits that he is at fault for a bunch of things, and he was hoping to fix things, and now seems like the perfect moment. But then Lori states that she has a lot to apologize for. And this is a change for Lori. No one's ever really seen her do this, but nobody says anything. They let her talk. She basically says that everything about Shane, she's sorry for that. She's sorry about getting mad at him. She was just in the wrong state of mind, and she really just didn't know what to do with herself. She tells Rick this straight out and says that she was being a very poor wife, and Rick deserved none of it. Then she turns over to Carl and says that she owes him an apology too. She worried more about keeping him just an ordinary kid and pretending nothing was wrong and coddling him than preparing him for the new world, which was what Rick tried to do. And Lori now sees this and atones for this too. And they all get a big hug together, and sweet. Now, besides the fact that Lori has to take in T-Dog's death and the disappearance of Carol, who we know to be alive, nothing outside of that changes. Glenn and Maggie still go out to get the baby formula because Lori's still recovering and trying to tend to Judith herself. Glenn and Maggie still get kidnapped by Merle, and that interrogation scene pretty much doesn't have any differing effects, except this is the first time that Lori would meet Merle, because after Daryl and Merle, they escape the governor's place and everything. Besides Lori meeting Merle, knowing what he's about, like, first up, nothing really changes outside of the main story. So, honestly, not much to talk about. But there is one big thing to talk about. Michonne and her appearance at the prison. Now, with Lori alive, this is going to make Michonne and Rick never happen, ever. And you'll see more why that happens in the story moving forward. But it also poses the question, what will Michonne's role be in the group? Michonne arrives at the prison the same way as she does before. But with Lori there, does that mean that the group are still going to let her in? Or could this change Michonne's fate as we know it? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, I am bringing you guys part 2 of What If Lori Survived. And this is going to be a longer part because before I was just doing the opening and basically the plot for the story. But now we're actually going to get a 12-minute episode here. So I hope you guys enjoy. Anyways, I've already expressed my hatred for Lori's original character in The Walking Dead. But if you saw from part 1, I've made it so that she changes her demeanor and basically placed in the group after she survives the pregnancy. Anyways, besides her finding out about the death of T-Dog and the disappearance of Carol, who we know to be alive, and eventually meeting Merle for the first time, nothing really differentiates from the original story. Until we hit a big sequence that I talked about at the end of last episode. Michonne. And now this is huge, because if you guys remember, because of Lori's death, this led on to Michonne and Rick becoming a couple. But that's not going to happen in this story, as many of my other stories, they didn't even get together. Point being, I ended off with if Michonne is actually going to be in the group. And you're going to see what comes of that. Now, Michonne enters the gates of the prison, or the outskirts of the prison, I should say, and has the baby formula in one hand and sword in the other, and is quickly surrounded by the zombies like she is in the original story. Now, you would think that from the way I ended last episode, that Lori would somehow be making the decision to let Michonne in. And that's not entirely true. She is Rick's wife, so by that standard, Rick being the leader, she does still get a say, but it's not the main say. Now, she does seem suspicious because of the blade. I think it's mainly throwing her off, and just her Michonne's stature seeming like a dangerous person, especially to Carl. Now, she's changed her attitude and the way she thinks about things, but she definitely is still wanting to be a cautious person, obviously, because it's the zombie apocalypse. You can't really trust anybody nowadays, because look at what happened with her and other people in the group and just other things before. So, she is wary of Michonne, but then she sees the baby formula and is like, wait, Glenn and Maggie went to get the formula. But this still makes her think that Michonne killed Glenn and Maggie just for the formula, but that wouldn't make any sense, she thinks to herself. So, she thinks something must have happened to him, and this girl has come to give him the formula in place of Glenn and Maggie. So, ultimately, Michonne is let in by the group like before, and honestly, I think that it would be a much more, how shall I put this, gentle approach with Michonne, because Lori hasn't died. So Rick's a much calmer and content, nice person, even though he still killed Shane and that part of him's kind of gone. Anyways, even though Lori has changed herself to be a better wife and a better mother, she's still wary of this person, even though she did get the formula for her child. So, like I said, even though she's gotten herself to apologize to Rick and Carl, she still keeps Carl away from Michonne. For now. She's not going to keep him away from her forever. She just wants to make sure that Michonne's not going to try anything. But, thankfully, because of everyone's much more nice demeanor, because of Lori being around and having been a changed person now, the interrogation with Michonne is much, much nicer, and Michonne is actually more willing to talk, seeing as how everyone's nice, but she's still in a dark place, because this is Season 3 Michonne, mind you. So, yeah. Anyways, the whole group that goes to Woodbury the first time with Michonne, that being Rick, Daryl, and everybody else that went, honestly, I feel that segment wouldn't really change, except maybe Lori and Carl going, or at least Lori, but I feel like she would stay behind with Judith because she's her mom. Anyway, we then get to the governor's character arc progressing as it does, but you'll see in the next few episodes that the governor's going to mean more to the story than you might think. And I'm not going to spoil anything yet. Anyways, we then get to the scene where Tyrese's group enters the prison, but here's the big difference. Rick isn't crazy because Lori's alive. So that means that Tyrese's group is never going to leave the prison. They're staying with the group permanently. So, that's a notable change for you. We then get to the scene of the governor attacking the prison. And honestly, everything leading up to before that and during that, honestly, I don't see much changing, except maybe a few scenes with Lori and Judith and just stuff here and there. Now, we get to the attacking of the prison by the governor and his men, and I feel that Axel would still be the only one to die here. Now, there is one change for this, and I feel that it's just a small one. Lori would be there to help the group against the governor and stuff. And Rick would actually be inside the walls because he's not seeing Lori because she's right there. So he would actually be inside the walls rather than outside of them, I think, if my memory is not mistaken. Anyways, we then get to Daryl and Merle helping Rick and everybody else, and ultimately the governor having to retreat. Now, then get to another big thing. Maggie. Remember, she was just recently raped, so to speak, by the governor. Not like raped, but you guys can pick up what I'm putting down. She was still assaulted by the governor. So, instead of being confronted by Glenn to try and comfort her, which ultimately didn't really go anywhere, Lori does. And she has a good talk with Maggie, because she tells her that if she knew Shane, then Maggie knew what Lori went through, and she tells her about what happened at the CDC and what Shane did to her. And Maggie knew Shane pretty well from what he was back at the farm and everything, so this definitely helps Maggie a lot more. And it's a good talk to have. Now, here's another big thing. I know I keep saying that, but this one ultimately also matters. Milton and Andrea going to the prison. Now, that's where this change comes in, right when they're going to the direction of the prison. Originally, Milton helped Tyrese's group because they had been kicked out because of Rick's craziness and led them to Woodbury. But since they're at the prison permanently, that means that Milton is going to go with Andrea the full way to the prison. Now, I know that it doesn't really mean too much in the grand scheme of things, and Milton didn't really seem like a fighter, but him being around and watching Andrea's back and this is just a decently significant change to the story. Anyways, Andrea and Milton arrive at the prison, and it's ultimately a much more welcome for them. It's kind of a weird way to say it, but it's definitely a lot more a gentle welcome, so to speak, because of everyone's character development and Laurie being alive. Now, whenever Laurie sees Andrea, considering the last time that they pretty much met is whenever Andrea basically encouraged Beth to kill herself. Now, Laurie doesn't truly 100% still hold this against her, and that's not why she's truly upset, because she's heard about what Andrea and the governor have been doing and everything, being around each other, and she tells Andrea from personal experience that will not do. She's going down the wrong road. And she either goes and kills the governor, or she doesn't want to see her face again. Pretty much says that to her face. So Milton and Andrea go back to Woodbury after everyone talks to them and stuff. Anyways, we then get to this specific change. Since Laurie is still around with Carl and Rick, that means that she's going to go with Rick and Carl instead of Michonne to go to the place where Rick met Morgan again. So, kind of a minor change again, but still relevant when it comes to right now. Rick and Morgan still have their scuffle like they do before, except this time, when Morgan asks about Rick's wife and son, he says that they're both alive. Now, here comes the next big thing. Does Morgan go with Rick this time because of Rick saying that Laurie's alive? Does this actually happen? Well, you guys are going to have to wait till next time to find that out. Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for today. And today, I am bringing you guys part 3 of What If Laurie Survived. And for those of you who don't get to see the first couple parts whenever I post a new episode, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background besides the recap on, the backstory of why I chose now to start doing this particular topic. Anyways, if you guys have been tuning in, you know that I put this off for a long time. Not like What If Amy Survived, but because I did not think that anything could ever come of Laurie's character. Because she just was not likable, in any sense of the word. But I actually was able to think of a conveniently good story to change around Laurie's character after she survived the pregnancy. And if you guys have been tuning in, you realize that not in many parts, but she's definitely mattering in the grand scheme of things, and that's going to go further on into the story. Now, because of Laurie being alive, this puts Michonne in a lower type of place in the group. Not really getting close with Rick in any semblance because Laurie's alive. At any rate, we recap with the scene where Rick, Michonne, and Carl would originally go to the place where Rick met Morgan for the second time. But, since Laurie is still alive, that means she is going to take the place of Michonne and go with Carl and Rick to the place where Rick met Morgan for the second time. So, we left off with Rick actually getting in the scuffle with Morgan and then trying to get him to remember him and all that stuff. Except this time, whenever Morgan asks about Lori and Carl and stuff like that, Rick actually states they're both alive. And Rick's honestly a much more chill person because of this. And he even more does not want to hurt Morgan, more so than than what happened in the original, because he's a much tamer person. And I left off with, would Morgan change his mind and actually go with Rick because Lori's alive? And he mentioned it to Morgan. Well, no. Morgan was still crazy, and I doubt that hearing that Lori was alive would compel him to change, but it does sway him a little, but not enough, because, like I said, he's still crazy. So for those of you thinking that Morgan was gonna pop in with the group around now, sorry about that. Anyways, we get to the talk with Rick and the governor, and actually them meeting for the first time, and besides Lori possibly going with Rick for this, I don't see much changing outside of the fact that Rick will take the talk a little nicer. So, not really much would differentiate here. Anyways, Merle changing his ways and letting Michonne go free, I feel that this would happen almost sooner, possibly, because of, like, maybe Lori being alive compels Merle to see that Rick was telling the truth about finding his family and stuff, but outside of maybe happening earlier, him letting Michonne go free, getting into a fight with the governor, and the governor ultimately killing Merle in the end, I don't feel that much would change there either. Lori matters in some regards here, but a lot of things won't really change, but that'll be different here soon. For example, since Milton actually went with Andrea to the prison and escorted her there, I feel that the governor wouldn't blame Milton for burning zombies and stuff. If he did, it would happen, like, later down the line. Which means that even if he did kill Milton, Andrea would live because the group would already have been there by that point and save Andrea. So even if Milton did die, that means that Andrea would be saved almost in the nick of time. So, like some of my other stories, my What If Shane was never killed by Rick, and What If Amy survived, Andrea is actually going to live here. So, that's a thing. And I feel that because of this, Michonne, even though she's in a lower place in the group because Lori being alive, I feel that Andrea being alive and Michonne actually being part of the group, unlike my other stories, this actually makes Michonne a much nicer person too. Gets her kind of out of her dark place, because, I mean, she was getting there. It was just, now it's going to happen faster because of Andrea being alive. Anyways, the second fight with the governor appearing at the prison for the second time, and then him having that killing spree, and then going off on his own, that all happens per normal. We then get to Season 4, the beginning of Season 4, where everything seems to be going good at the prison, until Patrick becomes a zombie. That's when all hell breaks loose, pretty much, for a lack of a better term. Anyways, with more people in the group, by, like, maybe a few people, I'm not just including Lori here. Anyways, the problem is dealt with much more cautiously and stuff. But we then get to another big thing here. Kind of big, but not too big. Whenever Rick, Tyrese, Daryl, and Carol, and Lori find Karen and David burnt. This time, whenever Tyrese punches Rick, this is going to... Because Rick is a much nicer guy, because Lori being alive, he still wants to punch him back, because Rick Grimes is not going to take someone punching him twice, like Tyrese did, without at least retaliating back. But, as I said, Rick is a much nicer person here, even though Shane, him having to kill him, did change him, but he's still nicer. At any rate, with him being a nicer person and Lori being there, she stops him from doing anything rash, and Rick was already not really wanting to start a fight, so I feel like this would sway him. Eventually, Rick finds out that Carol was the one who killed Karen and David. He consults Lori into whether or not he should banish her, and Lori says that even though Carol is a very fond member of the group, she wouldn't feel safe with what she did to Karen and David. She doesn't want it happening to Carl or anybody else. So Rick ultimately still banishes Carol, but I feel like it would happen much, much nicer. Not that it didn't happen somewhat nice in the original, I'm just saying that what would happen going about it would happen a lot nicer. We then get to the scene where the governor shows up with all of his new family and men and holding Herschel and Michonne hostage. And I know that I'm kind of maybe skipping through a bit of the story, but some parts would honestly remain the same, so there's not much to talk about. Anyways, Rick would then step up to near the prison gates and give his speech to the governor like he did before, about like people changing and they can join them and live together, pretty much what he said before, except this time he's not alone. Lori also makes her own speech to the governor, saying that she knew someone just like him, and says everything about Shane, what he was like, what he did to her family, trying to kill Rick, and that the governor, he's reminding her a lot of him, and that's a path that he does not want to go down. And she also agrees with Rick that people can change. He can change too, because she changed. Andrea also steps up and says to the governor that she knows him probably more than anyone else here does, because she was around him probably the longest, outside of maybe Michonne, from time to time, and says that she knows him to be a good person, and all that set him off was his daughter's zombified death, and that there is a way back. And with 3 people consulting him and his men turning down, like, now because of more people talking, what does the governor do here? Does he actually change his ways and become part of the group, unlike any of my other stories, and become valuable to Rick's group, and ultimately meaning an overkill for any other villains? Or are these words falling on deaf ears? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for today. And today, we are getting into part 4 of What If Lori Survived. Now, if you guys have been watching the series so far, then you know that my original depiction, as I'm sure probably others, of Lori's character originally in The Walking Dead was not so good, to say the least. Anyways, in this story, I've actually made her, after surviving her pregnancy, not only a better wife and mother, but a much better character. And another plus to come out of this, as well as maybe a few others, is that Andrea gets to live, just like a few of my other stories. Now, this time, it was just by luck that she managed to live, because originally she was killed by Milton Mammoth's zombie, but this time she was saved just before Milton actually became a zombie. So this time was by luck instead of just saying she lives, pretty much. Anyways, Michonne, since Lori is still alive, is a side character now and actually alive with the group, unlike a vast majority of my stories. And yeah, she's still a likable character in the group, but she's just a side character. Anyways, we recap the last episode with the governor and his new family and the tank and all of his men and stuff, and taking Herschel and Michonne hostage. Pretty much all that goes per normal. Up until the point where Rick gives his speech to the governor about people changing, etc., etc. And this time, Laurie is also giving a speech, as well as Andrea, who knows the governor very well, having spent probably the most time out of anyone with him. Now, I ended last time with, does the governor actually turn good here? Because not only is Rick talking to him, trying to get him to change, Herschel, Laurie, and Andrea are all trying to make him change. Does he actually turn good and join the group with his family? I ended with that last time. And today we find that out. The governor is in the same thinking process holding the weapon. But instead of saying liar and slashing Herschel's neck, he drops the blade, shocking everybody. Especially his family, or supposed family. And, seemingly, the governor's turned good? Question mark? Before anybody has time to process what's going on, Lily and whole Megan got bit thing, that still happens, but it's a much more somber mood instead of a dark / mad governor mood because of the mood that the governor is in. He still has to put her down, but even Lily can tell that he really didn't want to do this. And since there's no destruction of the prison, well, except like one prison tower, and no one's died, except Megan, does Lily stay with the governor and not kill him like before? Well, I think that it would take some time, but eventually I do feel like Lily would stay with him, because she seemed like a keeper for him, especially since she saved his life when he was alone. But before the governor can start talking and say his piece again, Michonne, after being untied, picks up her weapon and threatens the governor, seriously about to kill him for good this time. Screw the poking out the eye thing, stabbing the eye, she's gonna take his other eye and then his life. But before she can do anything, Rick comes out and stops her, saying that they have just gotten the governor on their side, and it seems like he already has to deal with a new loss with his new family. Killing him now, that would just spark something else. They are just now getting him on his family and on their side. No point in wasting that potential now. The governor, now saying his piece, says that he's truly 100% sorry for what he did, and basically says that if everybody's okay with it, he and his family would be more than happy to join Rick's group. And we have the governor and his family joining the group. But unfortunately, the zombies are still going to be attracted to the tank exploding one of the prison towers. So the group still has to leave the prison. And with the governor's group there, and Herschel and everyone not being split up, this leaves the group a lot bigger, like my other stories, or at least the vast majority of them. They see the signs for Terminus on their way, like just no way in particular, and decide to go there. On their way there, we still would have a problem with Lizzie and her whole deal with the zombies, but I feel that it would be dealt with more calmly, so to speak, or just like much more, what's the word? Just dealt with in a better manner. Let's just leave it at that. She wasn't really a threat to a bunch of people around the group. Anyways, what happens with Carol? Because she said that she saw the smoke in the original, and that's why she came back and heard the explosion and all that stuff. I think that she would still come back because of the explosion, and she would actually join the group because everyone wanting her back. So she actually gets to come back to the group a little bit earlier, but not by too much. Now, along the way to Terminus, the Claimers, I feel, would still try to make a attack on the group, but as big as it is, especially with the governor and his people, they are absolutely 110% no match. No one even dies here. The Claimers are nothing. Anyways, still later down the road, on the way to Terminus, everybody meets up with Abraham, Eugene, and Rosita, and them saying that they're trying to get to DC for the cure, and basically Eugene knows how to save the world and all that stuff. And the group decides it was, I guess, on their way. They'll see what happens. They also mention Terminus, and the group just still decides to go there for the moment, with Abraham, Rosita not really liking the idea too much. But if it's a safe haven, they can at least check it out, like they did before. They just did it reluctantly. Anyways, we eventually get to the scene where all of the group gets to Terminus, but it's a much more, calmer group. Rick's not hiding any weapons because he doesn't really find a need, because he's a much nicer Rick. But is this really a safe haven? And can the bigger group take on Terminus? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, we are getting into part 5 of What If Lori Survived. Now, I hope you guys are enjoying the series so far, and what it's worth, I actually am quite enjoying the idea of this now. At first, if you guys couldn't already tell, if you watched my update on Next Topic and the first few parts for a bit of synopsis, I never thought that Lori surviving would have gone anywhere. Mainly because I didn't have much respect for the character. But if you guys have been watching, you realize that her being around means a lot. For one thing, like many of my other stories, Andrea gets to survive longer. Small thing, I know, her character wasn't as likable either, but still also was good in What If Amy Survived, so there's that. And helps Michonne's character since they both knew each other for a long time. Speaking of Michonne, she's with the group unlike the vast majority of my stories, and is sidelined to a pretty much side character with Rick and Lori being together still. She'll get with someone, Michonne, but I'm not going to reveal that yet. Next episode, though, I promise you guys that. Anyways, the biggest thing out of all of this so far is the recap of last episode. Why is that so important for those of you who possibly didn't watch it? Well, with Rick, Lori, and Andrea's help all together, the governor has turned good. Yes, I know, it's surprising because I've never really done something like this. I did say what if the governor agreed with Rick's offer to join him at the prison, but that ultimately I don't think would have went anywhere at the time. And this time, with extra people talking to him, he's actually turned good. But he's still kinda crazy-ish. Just, he has a better sense of himself now. Let's just leave it at that. Especially with Lily there. And he is going, with him being alive still, and pretty much his entire family, or, new family, that means that the group, Rick's group, and theirs, this is a big, big group. Possibly bigger than any other group that I've possibly conjured up in any story. And that's saying something. Well, at least at this part of the story, because it's going to get even bigger from here on out, obviously. Anyways, since the prison fight really didn't happen outside of a tank blowing up a watchtower, the group altogether goes for Terminus. And Carol, I feel, she heard the explosion of the tank and everything blowing up the watchtower, so I feel like with everybody's on their way to Terminus, I feel that Carol and them would meet up at one point or another, or at least one of the people of the major big group would see her, and she would be allowed to come back, because Rick and everybody else is much, much nicer with their character development since Lori lived. I know. Shock. Anyways, on their way to Terminus also, like I stated, they would meet up with Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene and basically say, Eugene knows the cure, blah, blah, blah. We know he's not actually telling the truth on that. But, yeah, it's pretty much where the story is at. Now, to recap the important part of last episode, Terminus. How's that gonna go with the much bigger group? Well, that's what today's episode is going to bring. So, the big group altogether arrives at Terminus, no one captured, yet. And I don't think that's going to happen. You'll see why soon. Anyways, the big group goes to the center of Terminus and meets up with Gareth and all the other cannibals, or people, if you want to stick to what Rick and the group know of them at this point. Anyways, the encounter is surprisingly much, much calmer. Why is that, you might ask? Well, true, Rick did kill Shane, and that changed him forever, but Lori is still alive, and a bunch of the group is. So his character development is much, much more laid back. So he's not going to hide any guns or anything like he did in the main story. So this, honestly, he thinks it's a pretty chill place. Everything seems to be going okay. A little bit sketchy because of the layout and everything, but everything seems to be going okay. But there's a thing. The governor is there. And true, he has aligned himself with Rick. I'm not going to go full on and say that he's become, like, a truly good person like he was before. Because he was still kind of bad before he lost his daughter. Or zombified daughter, mind you. But at any rate, he's still sketchy at this place. He's more sketchy than anyone else in the place, mostly. And suffice it to say, he picks up what everything's going down, pretty much. He knows what's happening, basically. He doesn't suspect truly that Gareth and the others are cannibals, but he knows something ain't right. He pulls out his gun to show that he means business, and for them to start explaining. This changes the tune of Gareth and the cannibals quickly, because Gareth now knows that everyone seems to be, like, somewhat trusting of this place and not really suspecting them at all. But then this guy with the eye patch shows up, is about to spoil everything. They can't have that. So he decides to go about the plan like he did in the original and try and get everybody into the train cars, chop them up and eat them. But that doesn't really go too well, because for one thing, the governor doesn't allow him the courtesy to do that, because Gareth dies to the governor flat out, and then, suffice it to say, everybody else gets gunned down. The cannibals, I mean. So, pretty much, Terminus is done. People at Terminus are done. Kind of short with the Terminus stories, I know, but it's just how I think it would go in this regard. Anyways, after this, Abraham, of course, wants to go save the world, go to Washington, blah, blah, blah. Pretty much what we know him to do before he knew about Eugene lying. They pretty much go the same way that they did in the main story after this, with Father Gabriel and that encounter playing out as it did before, with him getting rescued. And honestly, outside of a bunch more characters being there, some extra character interactions, I don't see much changing this point of the story. Then we get to the church and the discussion for Washington. Since the cannibals are all dead, there's no need to, like, watch out for them. Nobody's going to have to fight them in the church. And Beth and everybody's there, so that changes a lot in this regard. Now, what about Washington and who's going to go? Well, even though there is no one missing, I do feel that Rick still would be stuck up on nobody wanting to get, like, split up. And I feel that Lori and several others would back him up on this. Lori especially. Because they just got a bigger group. They don't want to mess that up. So, honestly, I can honestly maybe think that the same group that tried to go to Washington, like Tara, Eugene, Abraham, Rosita, Maggie, Glenn, I still feel that that group would be the same, outside of maybe some others, but I don't really see much changing this point in the story either. Couldn't really think of something that would really make the scene matter more than it did, so it's roughly the same outcome as a whole. And as for the hospital scene and that arc, because of everyone being in the group and everything, no one being split off, as I've said, this arc wouldn't even happen. And that's pretty much been the outcome of several of my stories, or several stories that had this kind of arc in it, but it's honestly just how it would go because of what's happened. So then we flash to the scene where we see everyone walking down the road near the end of season 5, and yeah, I pretty much don't see much changing out of who would be in the group, but there is a lot of survivors since the prison arc and everything changed, like, dramatically. For one thing, we see Daryl being around Beth, in my What If Amy Survived and stuff, and some of my other stories. Lori obviously being alive, Andrea being alive, Herschel, Lizzie, or Mika, I mean. I almost called her Lizzie. Kind of get the names mixed up there. Lily obviously being alive, Bob, Tyrese, Mitch, the governor's right-hand man pretty much, and the governor rocking a beard like he did at the beginning of season 4, or kind of at the beginning of season 4, because I feel that would be him in that regard. Sorry about that, Lizzie Mika kind of mess up there. Never really messed up the names there before. Anyway, aside from that little mess up, we basically get to everyone getting to the barn like before, but with so many more people, I feel that this would honestly be easier for the group whenever the zombies, start banging at the barn and everything. We then get to Maggie and Sasha, or maybe even Maggie, Sasha, and a few other people because of how big the group is, meeting Aaron, and like I said before, with Rick and Lori being together still and Lori being alive, I think that they would be much more trusting of Aaron and his talk of Alexandria. So, the group would pretty much get to Alexandria in a much more calmer and gentle way, honestly. And the group gets to Alexandria being a lot bigger, and that's where we leave things. But even though everyone is trusting of Aaron, can Alexandra and Deanna and everybody else be trusting of the group, especially with the governor being in tow this time? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today we are getting into part 6 of What If Lori Survived, and it's been a pretty interesting story going forward. And originally, what I thought would not really be an interesting story with Lori surviving has actually changed pretty decent things going forward. For example, Michonne is actually a part of the group still, unlike the majority of my stories that focused on earlier in The Walking Dead, but is sidelined to a side character because of Lori being in Rick's life. Along with that, and along with Lori surviving, we have a bunch of other survivors that have not really been featured in the majority of my stories and are just characters that survived before in my stories. Bob, Lily, Mika, Herschel, Mitch, Tyrese, Daryl, and Beth are together like the majority of my stories. Andrea's alive, and the governor rocking a beard sort of like Rick at the end of season 5, middle of season 5, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, and the governor turned good. I forgot to mention that part for those of you who did not know that, and it's a very unique twist that I think is pretty cool that the governor turned good, at least one of my stories. Anyways, we recap the last episode with the meeting of Aaron and the whole talk of Alexandria, but considering the fact that Lori is in Rick's life and less people have died pretty much, this means that getting to Alexandria, they would trust Aaron more, I feel. So the entrance to Alexandria and everything, I feel would go so much smoother. It would honestly not be as, concerning to the group as it was before when they couldn't really trust I mean, it probably would be like a little bit untrusting from some members of the group, especially the governor, because he's not like goody two shoes and everything. But everything that leads up to that would pretty much go the same, and they would all meet Deanna and have the interviews. And honestly, I don't see much changing, at least this part of the story, outside of the group being a lot nicer and less skeptic and less, like, imposing, to say the least. And Deanna would interview all the new people that survived, and outside of maybe mistrusting the governor a little bit because of his behavior and possibly the eye patch and just the way he looks, I don't see much changing this part of the story at all besides, like, what I just mentioned. And everything after that would go pretty much normal until we get to when Deanna originally offered Rick and Michonne the jobs to be policemen, basically, of Alexandria. Except this time, I feel that Rick would have the police uniform alone. For a couple reasons. One, he's not together with Michonne. Two, I feel that Lori, albeit on one hand, because of her development that I have described so far in the story, you'd think that she'd want to, like, take on her husband's role in a manner of speaking, being a second police woman, so to speak. But on the other hand, I see Deanna more or less offering her a counselor sort of role, in a way. But that's up to you guys, honestly. What would you want me to, like, depict her as? It honestly might not change the ending result as a whole, but it'd still be good to hear from you guys. And here's another unique thing. I feel that this interaction would be a good one. Mitch and Abraham. I feel that these two would get along in the group really, really well. One, because of their old jobs, Abraham being a U.S. Soldier sergeant or something along those lines, and Mitch having drove a U.S. Army tank and being experienced with military and their, like, fascination with weaponry and stuff. I feel that would really make them get along a lot. And another unique thing, we didn't get this relationship in The Walking Dead because of the whole governor killing spree and such. And Lizzie and Mika taking out Elijah in the process, that not happening here, I feel that at this point in the story, Tara and Elijah would actually have a relationship. And yeah, we'd pretty much have no Tara and Denise or no Tara and Olivia. So yeah, little good change there, pretty much. Anyway, like I said, pretty much everything would go down per normal in the story outside of a lot more interactions, basically. And the whole thing with Alden and Glenn and stuff like that, Nicholas, stuff like that, I feel that would go down per normal. We get to the scene with them all together, except I feel that it would be Glenn, Tyrese, Bob, and Nicholas. And maybe still Eugene, but who knows. And Alden would still die. Tyrese would take the brunt of the damage, like what in my What If Amy Survived video, instead of Tara, because I feel that Tara and Elijah would just be settling down in Alexandria. And as for who would take Noah's spot in the death whenever they're trapped behind the doors and stuff, I feel that Bob would take that spot, which we'd first see Sasha getting into her kind of crazy-ish mood, so to speak. So Bob would bite the dust here. Sort of like one of my other stories, I feel. But I feel that was T-Dog instead of Bob. But aside from that, we get to the whole spiel with Pete. And that's going to go a lot differently here. And I think you guys can pick up what I'm putting down. For example, in the original story, Carol was the one who told Rick about the whole beating and stuff like that and what was going on with Jesse and Pete. But this time, I feel that the word would spread to Carol through Andrea. not just because of coincidence or to make this like just a random thing, but she's alive. I feel that this would happen in some way, shape, or form. So the word would spread about what Pete was doing to Jesse and everything. And Rick and Jesse wouldn't have the whole small relationship that they were starting to build up in The Walking Dead because of Lori being in Rick's life. He still, I feel, would want to help her, but like he did before a lot, and still does in this story, I feel that he would console Lori on what to do. Because he did that a lot. Anyway, I feel that Lori... See, with the governor, they let him live. Because he wasn't as bad as, like, Ed was to Carol. Or Shane was to her and Rick. So I feel that she would tell Rick that taking the initiative to kill or at least keep Pete away from Jesse, I think kill would be the more, like, politically correct option in her mind. And I feel that it would just be the correct option as a whole coming from her. Because, like, all the reasons I said before. And here's another thing. I promised this last episode. Michonne ending up with somebody instead of being a loner. Now, since she is actually with the group and a side character because of Rick and Lori being together, I said that she was going to be with somebody, but I didn't say who. You want to know who it is? Tyrese. I am taking a page out of the Walking Dead comics with Michonne and Tyrese being together and actually putting them together in this story. Just because I feel that it would be right here, as it was in the comics. And I don't really read them that much, but like I said, it just seems right to me. To not, like, throw Michonne a bone, basically. Now, with the escapade with Pete, will it be easier because of the character's development in the story because of Lori being alive? Or could this end up turning down a bad road? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today we are getting into part 7 of What If Lori Survived. Now, as I said at the beginning, Lori was a character that I had absolutely no respect for outside of saving Beth's life for about 3 seasons. But anyways, you see, in this story, I made it so her character, after surviving her pregnancy, was significantly altered to actually be likable. And her being alive has changed a lot. Events changed, characters survived, etc. But to recap the last episode, we see the group getting to Alexandria in a much more calm and sophisticated manner, so to speak. And honestly, there's not much suspicion with the group since their character development, especially Rick's, has been significantly altered. Now, with Deanna and the interviews, like I said last time, outside of additional characters being there and Deanna's slight suspicion of the governor's motives, because he's not, like, truly 100% good, he's, like, somewhat there, nothing really changes this part of the story. Until we get to when Rick and Michonne were offered the police uniforms, in which I said that Rick would be the only one getting it because of Lori being in his life instead. Now, some would argue that Lori could be a cop along with Rick and actually take her husband's stead along with that. But I see her more getting like a counsel sort of role in that regard. Deanna would give her sort of like that, because I don't really see Lori being a cop. So, or a constable, sorry, Deanna worded it that way. I also said that Abraham and Mitch could be good friends with their experience in the military and Mitch's, like, tank usage and just their knowledge of weaponry and such. I think that these two, there was a missed opportunity to see them as friends. Also, initially in the original story, Elijah and Tara were somewhat getting into a relationship before they fought the people at the prison. But then Elijah was killed by Lizzie and Mika. I feel that with Elijah being alive, that this would actually spark a relationship between the two, and actually show up more as we get into Alexandria. To recap the last episode of the last important details, I said that instead of Carol telling Rick about Pete abusing Jesse, that the word would spread through Andrea, because she's alive, and more or less for convenience sake, not just because I wanted to throw someone in, just for convenience sake, I feel that this might happen. And Andrea and everybody else knowing like Ed and what Shane was like and everything, they would want to stop it immediately. Now, Rick and Jesse aren't going to have that small kind of relationship that they did in the original story, or at least were starting to, because of Lori being in Rick's life. He still wants to help her, don't get me wrong, but it's not like anything like romantic like, you know? Anyway, I also threw a little nod to the comics and said to Michonne actually being with someone, and that's Tyrese. Like I said, a little nod to the comics where they were a couple. And I wanted to kind of throw Michonne a bone here, because I feel like in pretty much the majority of my stories, I haven't given Michonne nearly enough credit, or, like, shown her, like, up as much as I possibly could have. So, there you guys go. Now, Deanna still doesn't want to go, like, killing Pete after the group, like, consoles her about, like, what's going on. And the group is much more calm here, so they're not truly 100% suggesting it either, not even Rick. He kind of is, but they decide to go about a much more, like, resolute solution, like kicking him out, or just putting him in a different house. So, that deal's done. After that, I feel that the whole Daryl and Aaron run and Morgan saving them, that honestly wouldn't change. But then we get to what would originally be the meeting to kick out Rick. But since Rick didn't give that whole speech and pull a gun on everybody, and the situation with Pete was dealt with much more effectively, kicking him to another house like before, except Rick didn't have to beat him up this time. So, if there was a meeting that night, I feel that it would be more along the lines of Pete, basically. It wouldn't be about Rick. But the whole Rick seeing the zombie thing and the gate open, I feel that that might happen, but maybe with someone else. But the meeting still does happen, but I feel it would regard Pete, if anything. And we still get Pete coming out with Michonne's sword, because I feel it would happen maybe one way or another. It's just Pete might have to be a little bit more cautious whenever going to see, like, Rick and everybody else, people who basically disowned him to another home. But instead of Deanna's husband, Reg, getting sliced by the sword, it is Mitch who actually puts up a decent fight before sadly dying. And the governor, right at that moment, just shoots Pete right in the head. No mercy, no hesitation, anything. Now, I said that the governor kind of turned good, but he's still kind of in his old mood, just not, like, nearly as much as, like, before, but he still kills Pete because even though he kind of forced Mitch to join him, he still liked him and what he was worth. Now, Rick tells Deanna that they didn't want this for Pete, but he chose his own grave, and he admits that the governor can be a little feisty at times, but it's what needed to be done. Pete was a menace, and several members of the group said they knew a person like him, people like him. I'm talking about Ed and Shane here. And Deanna, albeit reluctantly, since she didn't lose Reg this time, is still kind of skeptic and wanting to kick the governor out now, but I feel that Lily and several others like Andrea and stuff would, like, convince her to keep the governor in. and say it's basically what needed to be done. He would have killed someone else had Mitch not stepped in. So it's what needed to be done, basically. Through the time skip that we get through the end of season 5 and the beginning of season 6, in my What If Amy Survived, I discussed that Daryl and Beth being together would mean that they would have a kid, which I called Katniss for simplicity's sake. And I feel that the same would apply here because Beth's alive. And I feel that this would be still the most likely thing to happen. But it would happen like sometime after reaching Alexandria, so Katniss is very young still. Like a baby, pretty much. A toddler, maybe. We also get a very nice interaction between the likes of Morgan and Rick and Laurie. Laurie very much so thanking Morgan for saving Rick's life. Because had he not done that, Rick would have never found him. She owes basically everything to him. Because he brought her husband back to her. So it's definitely a nice interaction, but Morgan doesn't really have too much to say outside of maybe thank you, because, I mean, he's calmer now because of his Eastman interaction, but I don't know. Morgan sometimes isn't all there, if you guys know what I mean. Anyways, the beginning of season 6 and Rick leading everybody against the zombie herds and everything, that pretty much plays out the same. Nothing really to cover there. All up until the clock tower falls. And this is where we're going to have a big change because of the people in the group and the fact that the wolves are going to be there and deciding who dies in the next episode. Because that's where we're going to be leaving things for the moment. Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If Topic video for you guys today. And today we are getting into part 8 of What If Laurie Survived. What a journey this character has been through, from basically in the original to being a pointless, drawn-out character to, in this story, actually being pretty handy to the group and to her family. Now, I didn't make Laurie a warrior like Michonne or anything, because I didn't see it fitting her bill, but I made her more of a better mother and wife figure and a better member to the group after she survived her pregnancy. Anyways, to recap the last episode, we left off with the clock tower falling and the wolves invading. And I left off with if the wolves' invasion would go smoother or if it would end up being more bad for the group. And today, that is where we resume our story. So, the wolves invade, pretty much everything goes down per normal, outside of extra characters, basically. Now to who is going to actually die? Well, I do not know if I ever had Herschel survive up to Alexandria before. But, in the case of everything that had happened thus far, he actually got to. So, I think that if he somehow, someway were able to survive up until this point miraculously, he would die here, basically. Because I don't think I ever made him survive this long, but if he were somehow, someway able to, he would die here. I don't see any way around that. And afterwards, Herschel dying, Maggie and Beth would, obviously, retaliate and kill the wolves that killed him. And I think that Reg would take Deanna's death here, and he would be the one who gets bit and dies instead of Deanna, because he didn't die against Pete because Mitch, the governor's basically right-hand man, took that death instead. Andrea, I also feel, as I've done in multiple of my stories, my What If Rick Didn't Kill Shane, my What If Amy Survived, etc., Andrea died around this point to the wolves, and I feel that the same would apply here. So, those are the people that died. Now to focus on the other parts of the story before we get to the wolves again. I feel that when Rick was alone in the original story, that Lori would be with him here for simplicity's sake, and just because Lori has evolved, I feel, to this point where she's out with Rick more, instead of just being at, like, their camp, just basically existing. Anyways, while Rick and Lori are doing their thing on their own, gearing the zombies away, and the group's fighting the wolves, Tyrese is with Sasha, Daryl, and Abraham whenever they meet the Saviors on the road. So I feel that with Tyrese there, things could go a little smoother, but ultimately the Saviors would get blown up nonetheless. Because with everyone's development in the group, still kind of... they're not going to let some people tell them to give over their weapons and such. Anyways, pretty much everything, like I said, would go per normal in the story. Owen would take Denise hostage, and then we get to the scene where Rick, Sam, Jesse, Michonne, Carl, and Father Gabriel and Ron would all be basically covered in zombie guts, and we know where the story would go from there. Carl would get shot, Sam and Jesse would die, Ron would die. But this time, things are going to be a little bit different. Because, for one thing, I feel that since Tyrese would be with Daryl, Abraham, and Sasha, that Michonne would be there too. So Lori, I feel, would take the stead of Michonne's spot once again. And I don't think that Sam and Jesse would die here. And if Ron did somehow try something, it wouldn't end well for him, but I'm gonna say that he doesn't try anything, and say that basically Jesse, Sam, and Ron all live. And another thing to come out of this, Carl doesn't lose his eye. And also, for Jesse living, that's not going to turn anything major. Jesse, Sam, and Ron are basically still going to be side characters because of Lori still being in Rick's life. So nothing really big's going to come out of that, like my What If Amy Survives story. Just to throw that out there. Anyways, pretty much the rest of the story would not too many changes. Rick and Daryl would still encounter Jesus. He would let them know about the hilltop, except he would tell Rick and Lori because Michonne's not with Rick. So, yeah. We'd still get the whole Ethan escapade trying to kill Gregory and all that stuff. That pretty much goes down per normal. And Gregory is still the stuck-up fool that he was in the original story. And I feel that even with that, Maggie and him would still make their deal about half the stuff. And everyone in the group's letting on about the Saviors. And honestly, I see the satellite outpost attack going pretty much the same as it did before. Maybe with some extra character interactions and scenes, but outside of that, I don't see this, like, part of the story, aside from a few other parts, being any different. So, yeah. Abraham and Eugene after that, they would still have their whole differences because the whole Washington trip, that still happened. So, there's that. That wouldn't really change at all, I don't think. Further along the lines, Daryl, Denise, and Rosita, I still feel, would go on their little trip. Except, this time, when Denise dies, it's not, like, as big an impact, because Tara is with Elijah, and they're still in Alexandria. They're not going on that big trip. So, Dwight would be the only real nuisance there. Anyways, after that, Carol still gets encountered by the Saviors because she still leaves. I feel that would be inevitable. But then we get to another change. Rick and Morgan going out to go and find Carol. But this time, I feel that they would be accompanied by Lori. No, I know they would be accompanied by Lori. Because Lori, after figuring out and realizing that Morgan saved Rick's life, she feels more in debt to him than ever because he brought him back to her. So she agrees with Rick that he shouldn't look for Carol alone, and he should let them accompany him. But Morgan, being the stubborn man that he is, his character development, still insists, even with this, that he go alone. And they don't gotta worry about paying him back or anything. That debt was paid. Anyways, I feel that Daryl would still go after Dwight and everything, not because of Denise this time, but because he feels endeared to and, like, guilty for not killing Dwight before. That was another thing. And I feel that it would be the same characters, Michonne, Glenn, Rosita, except with a few others. Beth, for one thing, who embraces Daryl because they're together and have a kid, and says that he doesn't have to do this alone, and if he really has to go after Dwight, they're going to do this as a team. They've always been a family, a team, so if he's really going to go after him and all those other guys, they're going to do it together. And I feel that Tyrese and Sasha would be there. One, because Michonne and Tyrese are a thing, as I said before in an episode or two, I think. And Sasha would obviously be there, I think, with Tyrese for the most part. That would be like the main reason. And they both agree on this as well and says that this is a lot of people. They got like a good amount of people, and it was only Dwight and those few guys. But they're sadly mistaken when they think this will go well for them. I think you know what I mean. They get surrounded and captured like before, even with the few extra people. Back at Alexandria, Carl still wants to enact his plan about keeping Enid safe and locking her in the closet. But this time, Laurie is there to stop him. Well, he doesn't even get the chance to do so, and Laurie doesn't even know that he's going to do so. Laurie knows that Carl is pretty much in love and wants to keep Enid safe, but she says that she let him fight. Why not let Enid fight? Carl sees this and knows what his mom is talking about, but for the first time in a decent many years, basically before Laurie had Judith, Carl looks at her with the same eyes that he had at her before, those same hateful eyes, but it's only for a second because, honestly, Laurie has a point, and Laurie has been nothing but good to him and Rick since surviving with Judith and everything, so he can't be mad at her. So, the group sets out, bigger than before, but losing a bit more members, but they're not quite aware of that yet.
Dad, can I go with you?
What will happen with the Saviors leading forward? Can they actually combat the Saviors before Negan gets the chance to line them up? Or is this going to end more poorly for the group? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, we're getting into part 9 of What If Laurie Survived, where we are delving into the entrance of Negan and basically the lineup and that whole deal. And as you guys may or may not have told from the story thus far, I have taken Laurie's pathetically drawn out and useless character and made it into something likable. And we resume our story from where we left off, with the entire group that was at the lineup, plus a decent bit extras, and their whole deal with first getting trapped at one roadway by Simon and his group of saviors, and then little by little, slowly but surely, getting surrounded from every which and where by the saviors. Basically that whole segment goes the same. I don't really think that anything would really change there, all things considered. Anyways, then we get to the clearing, in which Simon basically says they're done and hand over their weapons. And honestly, that segment would go the same were it not for a certain someone, the governor. Now, I've said this over and over again, he's good, but not good, like, in the true sense. He's still kind of how he was before, and is the only one to pull out his gun as a threat. But Rick basically tells him, and I'm going to make this sort of a reference to Martin and Gareth in the church. Basically, that is, except it's Rick and the governor. Basically, Rick telling him that there's no choice here. The governor's saying, yes, there is, and Simon and his savior saying, want to bet. Basically, that whole segment, if you want to be technical, since it didn't happen in the story, except with Rick and the governor. Basically, telling the governor there's no choice here. He has to put down his weapon. And yeah, they get forced to the ground, and we get into the entrance of Negan. But before he asks who's the leader, he heard about what was going on, and he asks who's the one who pulled the gun just now on his men. And finds out it's the governor, and it's like, Negan admires him right on the spot. One, for having the balls to do that whenever he knew that there was nothing really left for him, and his eye patch and just everything about him Negan admires. And shortly after saying all that, he then goes on his whole speech, now confronting Rick, and basically that whole speech goes down the same way that it did before. Up until the point where he decides to kill someone with Lucille. Now, who is that going to be in this story? Well, honestly, I can see him killing Abraham the same way before. Because even though there is extra people there, I just really think that Abraham would still be his first kill. Which in turn would make Daryl punch him, and I still think that Glenn would be the casualty here, the second one, because that yes, there is extra people I could throw into the mix, but one, don't want to be repetitive, two, it just seems like the most logical thing to do. After this, the governor being, see, he's still him, so he doesn't have like full-on true love as Daryl and Rick did for each other and like their whole group, but they did give him a new chance at life, and he's still with Lily and stuff and still respects Andrea. And seeing these two die, pretty much part of their family, the governor wants more than anything to just lunge at Negan and just kill him. Go back to his old ways. But then he realizes that if he did, he would just end up getting himself killed. And he almost got killed back when he tried to attack the prison multiple times. So he wisely decides not to do anything about it. But his emotions are still showing to Negan and everybody else, but he doesn't care. Now, as for Negan and Rick, here's the thing. Yes, Negan still did kill Glenn, who saved Rick's life. But Lori being alive, Carl being alive, his whole family still being alive, I don't think that Rick would threaten to kill Negan here at the time. I don't think he would say it to his face. If he did, that whole spiel about breaking Rick and basically getting the axe and everything, I still feel that would go a lot smoother and Negan wouldn't have to almost make Rick cut off Carl's hand. So ultimately, in like general, I don't see that whole scene happening, but I do think that Negan would still try to break Rick. Afterwards, and after the whole speech with that deal, Daryl is still thrown in the truck because I feel that that would happen inevitably. And I feel that the governor would also be taken for a couple reasons. One, I feel that Negan admires him like more than anybody else. One could argue that Negan would have just killed him, but I don't see that happening. But anyways, I feel that he would do this because he saw him as a good soldier. Two, I think that this would be just extra insurance to break the rest of the group. And 3, the governor played a huge part in killing his men. And guess who else he takes? Laurie. Now, I haven't mentioned Laurie to extreme relevance in the last few episodes besides minor things, but you know why he's taking Laurie? 1, because Negan had a whole thing about having a bunch of wives, so that part. And number 2, he might have broke Rick even easier than he thought, but he's doing this to make absolutely sure that he breaks Rick. Now, one could argue that by him choosing to do this, Rick would just lunge at him right then and there. But Negan tells him straight to his face, if he tries anything, if any of them try anything, he will do the exact same thing he did to Abraham and Glenn, to Laurie, the governor, and Daryl, and then all of them. So basically, they're all gonna die. And with that, the Saviors leave. And that's where we leave things for the moment. Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, we're getting into part 10 of What If Laurie Survived. Now, this episode's going to be slightly bigger than the other episodes because there is a bit more to cover in regards to this certain episode. But with that out of the way, let us dive into the recap before the actual story. So last time, we recapped with the entrance of Negan, and him killing Abraham and Glenn in the typical fashion, because I feel that besides other people, more people being there to witness their deaths, nothing would change that. Now in regards to breaking Rick, this would be a lot easier because of Laurie being alive. And even though I still feel he would threaten to kill Negan, after the whole axe incident, I don't feel that he would have to almost cut Carl's hand off. So, saves him from that at least. Now the governor? Negan kept an eye on him the entire time because he was the only one to show resistance whenever everybody else faltered and broke, kind of like Rick. So, yeah, Negan kept an eye on him. Now, whenever we get to Negan basically giving his end speech and everything at the beginning of season 7, that whole deal, Daryl still gets put on the truck because he still punched Negan, so he's going to get the same treatment he got before. Now, as for the governor, he's getting taken too, because for a couple reasons. 1, he was responsible for killing most of Negan's men along with the rest of Rick's group. 2, Negan saw value in him and also thought that his eye patch on just his whole demeanor was kind of cool. And 3, he didn't want this guy against him. No way. He knew he was a threat. Now, one could argue he could have just killed him, but that's a different story. And, big one, he takes Laurie too. Now, I know a bunch of you from the last episode are probably questioning this or agreeing with this. Why did I choose this particular path, you may ask? Well, for one thing, Negan's multiple wives, Laurie would kind of fit that regard. And for another, Negan possibly recognizing this as Rick's wife, eventually, sooner or later, would do this to make absolute sure that Rick would not turn against him, and that if he somehow did, that he could use this as leverage with Laurie, the governor, and Daryl all as hostages, and now possibly meant for the future? Yeah, this is definitely good insurance policy for Negan. With that, the Saviors take their leave, and Beth takes the place of Sasha in regards to helping Maggie get to Hilltop, because, you know, that whole deal with basically her still having to have a baby and everything, and still want to bury Glenn because Glenn still died here. Yeah, Beth takes the place of Sasha. Same with one of my other videos, can't remember which one precisely, but yeah. Now, as for the whole Carol and Morgan thing at the Kingdom, I feel that that whole segment would remain unchanged. Because, honestly, there'd be no one else, like, no extras there, so I don't see much changing that part of the story. Now, as for the Sanctuary and everybody's tortures, Daryl's still gonna get tortured the same exact way. So he is on a separate, basically his part of the Sanctuary where he's being held in his cell. So nothing really changes in regards to him. The governor is in a cell in a different part of the Sanctuary because Negan, of course, didn't want these guys conversing and basically trying to find a way to escape and or kill him. So he made absolute sure to keep them apart, all of them. So the governor is kept at a separate part of the Sanctuary, getting his own bit of torture. And he's definitely having flashbacks to like when he used to torture people, or at least attempted to. And as for Lori, she doesn't get tortured. She doesn't get put in a cell. She doesn't even get hurt. She at first questions this and thinks, even though this guy killed Glenn and Abraham, maybe he has some kind of decency. But that's not true. She gets taken to a room where Negan's wives are. She questions this at first, and then it becomes all too clear. And when the ladies explain their side, oh man, now it all makes sense. Whatever decency she thought that Negan had, oh, that's long out the window now. She has more disdain for this guy, even more so than whenever he actually killed Glenn and Abraham, and she has to find a way to escape. But while she's having this conundrum and Daryl's getting his own size of torture from Dwight, the governor is called to Negan, and Negan wishes to have a conversation with him. The governor gets called to Negan's room, and Negan basically tells the governor the list of choices he has. He either works for Negan as a dead man, or basically works for points, or lives like a king. And he also asked the governor to explain a little bit about himself, about who he was, like how he became the man he is right now, because he's interested, and he definitely wants the governor as a man. The governor, deciding to be coy with this and actually kind of liking the idea to maybe scare Negan, obliges and lets hold the entire story of his origin, basically who he was, how he became the man he is today, and he also goes into great detail about his torture chambers and what he did whenever he had a town of his own and was a leader before encountering Rick, and basically that whole spiel, and about the zombie heads and the tanks. And he's definitely going into great detail with this, trying to scare and intimidate Negan as much as humanly possible. But he also says that even with all this, Rick and his family still offered to spare his life and offered him a way out of death, basically saving him and make him part of their family. But he tells him that does not mean that he's as soft as Rick and the others are. He will not be easy to break. And after finishing his whole monologue, he tells Negan straight out that basically, yeah, he is not as soft as Rick. And then if he wants to break him, he's going to have to do a lot better than throwing him in a truck and basically trying to make him retrieve a weapon. Basically telling him how he broke Rick, basically. Trying to make Negan as intimidated and just do anything to get on Negan's bad side, because the governor doesn't care. After hearing all this, on one hand, Negan is perplexed and angry that this guy would even dare talk to him like this. Yeah, the nerve! But on the other hand, Negan actually is both surprised and just, he doesn't know what to think, really. But above all else, he is actually impressed with this guy. He has never had anyone speak to him like this before, ever. And he has never heard anyone's story this deep. And yeah, he definitely wants this guy as a minion now. There is no doubt in his mind. With everything he's heard, that pretty much sealed it. But he still can't have the governor talking to him like that, because he's got a reputation to keep up. And if he lets someone like this talk to him like this, what does that make him? So he basically goes for the scare tactic he used on Daryl to try and threaten him with Lucille, and is quite surprised at the results. The governor doesn't flinch. See, with Negan, he thought that the governor's whole tough act and basically everything like that would have dropped the second that the bat went near his face. But nothing. Same with Daryl. And this definitely stuns Negan. And the governor raises his face towards Negan and basically repeats what he said. If he wants to break him, he's going to have to do a lot better than scare tactics. And this definitely intimidates Negan. Negan is now still kind of impressed with this guy's resilience and toughness, but he's also starting to get annoyed with the governor's basically irritableness, and basically actually goes for the swing right at the governor's stomach. He goes hardcore with this swing, not holding back. And the governor clutches his stomach, now on the ground, almost gasping for air. Nah, that definitely taught him a lesson. And Negan says that he's definitely going to become a minion of his. He had his chance to do this willingly, and basically throws him back in his cell. Afterwards, and after Daryl's talk, or at least him trying to escape, Lori is called in. And she's basically just going off on him about all of his wives, and basically how much of a scum he is, and that he won't get away with this, and that she wants to go back to Rick. Negan smiles at this woman's persistence. Everyone he's seen here is persistent. And yet, Rick showed no signs of this, other than pretty much threatening to kill him. And that didn't take long to break him. But he smiles at this and says that, sure, you can go back home. We were just about to go to your little home to pay Ricky Boy a visit for our week's due. And I think that he's going to be most surprised for what we have coming for him. So, Negan and the Saviors begin their trip to Alexandria for their first week's worth of stuff. But what is the surprise that Negan is talking about? What does he have to offer Rick this time around that's different? Can the group get Lori, the governor, and Daryl back this time? Or will Rick show the first signs of his true murderous self? Will he actually be able to get his wife back? Or will this end badly for him and his son? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, we're getting into part 11 of What If Lori Survived. Now to recap the last episode, we saw the governor, Lori, and Daryl all get taken to the sanctuary, Daryl getting the same honest torture that he got in the original, and the governor actually telling Negan his backstory in excruciating detail with most parts, and ultimately frightening Negan to a degree while impressing him a lot, and eventually hitting the point where Negan literally took a full-on swing to the governor's stomach, wounding the governor considerably, and that kind of put him in his place. And like I said, Daryl got the same torture that he did before. Lori, she got to see firsthand who Negan really was in the hands of his supposed wives. And when she is called to Negan, she reacts just as much as you would expect someone who just witnessed what Negan actually does would react. And she's having none of it, because Shane and just the governor, even though he changed. But ultimately, she's having none of it and wants to go back to Rick, and wants Daryl and the governor free too. Negan smiles at this, admiring this woman's bravery, albeit still having to recover from his conversation with the governor and having to process all that. And he also, understands now why this woman is Rick's wife, because they pretty much both are almost the same way. He sees, the kind of love that she has for him, and says they're planning on going for their first week's worth of stuff anyway, and that he has a surprise for Rick. And we're going to find out what said surprise is right now. So, with that conversation out of the way, the Saviors begin their trip to Alexandria for their first week's worth of stuff. Rick, not knowing that the Saviors are yet to appear, is honestly kind of mad. He doesn't know what to think. He just witnessed the man Glenn, who saved his life, die, Abraham die, and now Daryl the governor and his wife are all taken. And he's about to take action, even though he knows that it honestly do no good. But before he can plan or do anything, that's when Negan and the Saviors make their first trip for their first week's worth of stuff. And along with them is Daryl in tow, the governor, who everyone is actually surprised to see him alive and Daryl alive, especially Lily. Now, I know I haven't mentioned Lily as of yet for a good few episodes because really hasn't been any relevance to mention her, but she's still around. And she, even though the governor's done some crazy things, even when they first met, she still is glad to see him because they've gotten really, really close over the time, after they got away from the prison, especially at Alexandria. And as for Rick, he sees that Lori is alive. And no bruises, no anything. She's not even being treated harshly. This seems a little too good to be true, while the governor and Daryl look pretty beat up. And this still kind of angers Rick, but right now, the prize concern that he's worrying about is his wife, because honestly, obviously that would be the case. Now, here's where the surprise comes in. Negan walks up to Rick. Before he tells his men to spread out and get the week's worth of stuff, he decides to talk to Rick in private. And he tells Rick that Lori is free to come back. Rick is dumbstruck at this. Really? Why? And Negan says that this was all a test. Had he actually went to go and kill him, he would have just killed all of them right away. But since he didn't do anything, well, Negan figured that he deserved some kind of reward. So, ultimately, yes, this means that Lori gets to come back. And whenever Rick asks for Daryl and the governor, I mean, you can probably guess that he's going to say no to that, like he did with Daryl. Afterwards, the men are going out to get the week's worth of stuff, and I feel that the whole thing with Carl threatening Davey and Negan talking to him would go the same, except it would be Rick and Lori both trying to sway Carl, which I think would go a lot easier. Now, Deanna is there also, and is witnessing firsthand the actual man that Negan is, because she wasn't there to witness what he did. But as she just lost Reg not too long ago to the wolves, she's definitely, she wants to leave things to Rick, but nothing's really going to happen that's going to make some kind of war right now, so, yeah. After the Saviors leave, Lori confronts Rick and lets him know all about who Negan really is, what goes on inside his walls, the multiple wives thing, and that he didn't do anything to her, but Daryl and the governor, they had it pretty rough. Rick is angry that Daryl and the governor were still taken, still mad at Negan for killing Glenn and Abraham, and honestly, the whole multiple wives thing, he's reacting pretty much the same way that Glenn did whenever he heard that Maggie was pretty much raped by the governor. So, but at least she wasn't hurt or killed, so that's a good thing. Meanwhile, since Rosita still lost Abraham, she still goes to Eugene to make her a bullet, because I honestly don't see any way of that's part of the story changing. Also, regarding Rick's family, Carl and Enid are still developing a good relationship, and it's actually going, like, much more somewhere like most of my other stories, rather than it not really panning out to its fullest in the original. Now, I feel that even though Carl would be a softer boy here with his mother around, and the fact that both of his parents are around, this whole family's alive, the fact that Glenn Abraham died and his mother was taken and everything, and Daryl and the governor are still taken, I still think he would go to try and kill Negan. As for Hilltop, Maggie and Beth are there because Beth took Sasha's place in that regard, like some of my other stories. And the whole treatment with the baby thing and everything, it's going pretty good, honestly. The same way that it did before. Gregory's still being stuck up on allowing Maggie and Beth to actually stay after hearing that they did not kill the Saviors. And this time, surprisingly, it's not Maggie who steps up. It's Beth. She draws on Gregory with her knife in a very, very serious way. And this is the most serious that Maggie has seen Beth ever. This is dramatic character development. But before it can amount to anything, Simon and his group of saviors arrive at the hilltop. And honestly, I feel that that whole encounter would play out the same way that it did before. Only this time, after they leave, it is Maggie and Beth actually draws in Gregory successfully, and after everything, Gregory just shuts his mouth. Now, Jesus would still go to try and rescue Daryl and the governor, and Carl would still be on the truck. Because like I said, I don't see Carl still not going to the sanctuary. I just feel like it would happen as a whole because of Glenn and Abraham dying, even if Lori was still alive. Now, you might be asking who discovers Oceanside now that Tara and Alicia, not Elijah, that was a name distranslation, so I'm sorry for that, any of you who noticed that. Since Tara and Alicia are together, I don't see them going on the trip to Oceanside. But Heath did go with Tara in the original. So, besides maybe one other person going, I see Heath making this trip alone. And I'm kind of going to throw him a bone here. You'll see what I mean here in a second. So, the whole thing that happened with Heath and Tara still happens, except it's Heath this time alone who falls over the bridge and survives. Afterwards, I feel that Cindy and everybody there would let Heath go, and I feel that Heath would get out on his own, much how Tara did, except it's not going to be like a whole, it's not going to be the same as it was with Tara and like Cindy and everything else. You guys basically get what I mean. And I'm throwing Heath a bone here because I feel that in the original, his fate, it was kind of never explained, so I'm kind of making it so that Heath gets some kind of justice here. Meanwhile, Carl arrives at the sanctuary, takes out 2 of Negan's men, and encounters Negan himself. But how will this encounter go this time? Will Negan actually do something to Carl? Is Carl going to really initiate his threat to Negan, even though he's a softer kid? Will Daryl and the governor get out, or is this the end for our group as we know it? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today, and today we are getting into part 12 of What If Lori Survived. Now, to recap the last episode, We are at the point where Carl attacks Negan's men at the sanctuary inside the truck. But this time, here's a big difference. Carl has 2 eyes still because he didn't get shot in the eye by Ron. So, instead of 2 men, I feel that he would maybe take out at least 3 or 4. But in the end, I still think Negan would not kill him because of how just... Negan liked kids, and he just liked how tough Carl was, per se. So I still think he would live. Meanwhile, Daryl is still outside and Carl sees him. But where's the governor? Well, from what the governor told Negan and basically tried to terrify him, now the governor is actually being forced to make torture chambers, which he said so himself that he did before. So, nice little callback there, except this time he's doing it against his will. Now, I feel that Carl and Negan's interactions throughout the whole thing, besides the fact that Negan wouldn't want to see his eye because he still has 2 eyes, would ultimately remain the same, all things considered, with Negan offering to drive him back to Alexandria and such. Now, since I feel that Rick and Aaron would still go on their own, that Lori would still be in Alexandria by herself. So, she is now wondering where the crap Carl is, because he kinda just up and left. Nobody really knows where he is, but Lori has an idea. Also, Jesus is on his own expedition to rescue Daryl and the governor. Now, one could argue that this would be infinitely more difficult because there's 2 people to rescue this time, but I would see either Daryl and the governor basically taking Daryl's route that he did in the original and killing Fat Joey, basically that, or Daryl does, and then they just rescue the governor from making torture chambers. But it would be definitely a very arduous task, to say the least, going back into the sanctuary. But I still feel that they would get rescued regardless. Now, what to do about Spencer and his meeting with Negan now that his mother is still alive? Well, this is where I hit a kind of a confusing point here with him. Now, one could argue that he just gets himself killed, again, because it's Spencer. One could argue that he lives because his mother's alive, even though his dad still died to the wolves. But I feel that before then, and Negan actually showing up, and while he's there, like, before Spencer goes to talk to him, that Deanna and Spencer would have a talk again, like the one they had about their father Reg and everything. But ultimately, I feel that even this talk wouldn't really amount to anything, because Spencer he didn't even listen to his own mom. So I don't see any good that the talk would really do to, like, change Spencer's fate here, or really mean anything to begin with. So I feel that Spencer would die here regardless, which, in turn, would cause Rosita to shoot Lucille, almost killing Negan, and basically all of that remaining the same. Now, who does Arat kill here? Well, this is where I hit another point where I was initially stumped. Because with Arat, she just shot somebody out of random and happened to be Olivia, and that was actually someone Tara was once again getting close to because she lost a niece. But I'm going to hit a darker point here for Tara's character in her own way. Instead of Olivia, who wouldn't really matter at all, the shot hits Alicia. Now this is definitely important, because Alicia initially was almost a pointless character because Tara and Alicia never really got together. It was almost destined to happen, but Alicia died to Lizzie and Mika. So I feel that her death here would be the actual first steps of Tara going into darkness. So the shot rings out, and Alicia is the target. Tara cannot believe what she just saw. This is her true first loss, pretty much. And it hits hard because they were a decent couple for a long time, even before Alexandria. And I feel that Eugene would still run his mouth, say he was the one who made the bullet to save Rosita's life. And definitely after seeing Alicia die and seeing how much she meant to Tara, he didn't want Tara to die, so he took the blame like he did before for both Tara and Rosita this time. Afterwards, and after Rick and Negan talk, they find out that Eugene made the bullet and everything. Laurie and Rick have a talk about Carl and him going and basically having one of their couple talks. Ultimately, Laurie and Rick solving things out like they did before, pretty much, and deciding that Negan, he has to die. He's gotten away with too much, even if he hasn't killed too many people. He still killed Glenn Abraham and people that they cared about. Meanwhile, at the hilltop, Daryl and Beth have a nice reunion since Jesus comes back with Daryl and the governor. And Daryl and Beth hug it out. Remember, Daryl and Beth still have a kid, so that matters a lot too. Now, we then get to the scene where Rick, Michonne, Laurie this time, and everybody else appears at the hilltop, meet up back with Daryl and the governor, figured out they were rescued thanks to Carl, really, and Rick and Laurie definitely know now why Carl did what he did, and actually appreciate him a lot more than for that now. Gregory, unfortunately, is still being stuck up, basically Gregory being Gregory. The same idiotic person that he was before, not wanting anybody to fight. And instead of Tara basically getting made fun of for trying to make a point, and basically getting made fun of by Gregory, whenever she hears this, her first steps into darkness, like I said, because of Alicia's death, she just pulls out her gun and is so ready to shoot Gregory, but is ultimately stopped. Everything past that, I feel, would remain the same, up until the point where the group meets with Ezekiel, and meets back up with Morgan, since he's there, and asks Ezekiel and the kingdom to fight against the saviors. Now, I feel that with Laurie and a bunch of other characters' influence, this would sway Ezekiel more, just not, like, to the motive that he was, like, in some of my other stories. I also think that Morgan would be more inclined to actually fight here. Not so much kill, maybe, as just to help, basically. Because, Morgan at this point still like, oh, life is precious. Basically Eastman's motto sticking in still, till he goes crazy again. Now, Daryl is still told to stay at the kingdom for risk of being found out by Negan and the Saviors. And ultimately, he still has to stay, although a lot of more people there are trying to fight to keep him, especially Beth, which she says that if he's going to stay, that she has to stay too, because, they're together. And that she's not going to leave him again after he was just trapped in a freaking place, forced to do bad stuff. The governor, on the other hand, he is also at risk of being found out, but nope. He is not going to allow Rick and anybody else to have a say in where he goes. He tells him about basically being forced to make torture chambers, something that he long outgrew. And the group ultimately decides that if the governor wants to come, they need to be very, very safe about it, which ultimately turns out okay for the moment. But ultimately becomes scarier when Simon and the Saviors appear at Alexandria looking for Daryl and the governor. The governor, luckily, is able to be pushed into good hiding for the moment, and the Saviors leave. Everything past that goes the same up until the point where Rick and the group find Gabriel at the junkyard and are basically about to make a deal with Jadis and the Scavengers. Now, this is where the episode is going to end for the moment. What do you guys think is going to happen here? Do you think that with bunches of more characters here, that Jadis and the Scavengers will actually be more willing to work with Rick's group and not turn against them? Or do you think that their stubbornness is just going to make things even worse in the long term of Rick's group? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, before we start, hope you guys like my new picture for my intros and basically the cover for my channel. I figured since Black Frieza was recently introduced a few months ago to the Dragon Ball Super manga, and how cool some people have made him look across the internet, that'd be a way cooler thumbnail for me. With that out of the way, we are going on to part 13 of What If Lori Survived. Now, we left off last time with Gabriel at the junkyard. Pretty much that lead-up goes per normal. And then we get to the scene where Rick and the group would make the deal with the Scavengers. And suffice it to say, the Scavengers are still stubborn, so to speak. Pretty much it goes per normal. And they want guns and such before they actually agree to fight. Meanwhile, back at the kingdom, Daryl and Richard still have their little interactions. Richard wants Daryl's help. They figure out that the stuff that Richard stashes at Carol's hut. Daryl and Richard fight. Pretty much all of that happening per normal. Then we get to the scene where Daryl and Carol meet once again at Carol's hut. Daryl tells her what happened, except the fact that Abraham and Glenn died. He doesn't tell her that. Pretty much all of that goes the same way that it did before. Except, I feel that for Daryl meeting up with Carol, at least that part, Beth would be there too. Because I don't see her being around for the Daryl and Richard thing, at least not until Daryl and Carol meet up again. So, little change there. And then they both go back to Hilltop, instead of it just being Daryl. Meanwhile, back at the sanctuary, Negan is introducing Eugene around, and Eugene making the idea for the walkers and such, that going per normal. Then we get to the scene where originally Rick and Michonne went to the carnival, found that big stash of weapons and food and such, and all that stuff playing out. Except this time, it's Rick and Lori going, because remember, Lori's still alive here, still a thing with Rick, and Michonne would probably just be with Tyrese, because, as I said in previous episodes, I threw a little nod to the comics, making them a couple. While Rick and Lori are getting those weapons and such, and about to make the deal with the Scavengers, Rosita and Sasha are still making their own plan to kill Negan for what he did to Abraham, because he still died. Tyrese, of course, finds out about this, being alive, and tries to talk Sasha out of it, because he remembers what happened whenever Bob died, what place Sasha was in, even though it happened later down the line and not in the church like the original. But Sasha says that with Rosita's help, it can be done, and it's just something that needs to be done. Now, with Tyrese alive, and like most of my other stories, Sasha's fate will not be decided at the sanctuary, or rather at the gates of Alexandria, when we saw that she was dead in the original. So for those of you thinking that this is still going to happen, I'd think twice. A little spoiler alert. Back at the kingdom, Benjamin is still shot, because that all led up the same way, and dies, leading to Morgan finding out about what Richard did and killing him personally, because I ultimately see no way around most of these events happening like they did before. After this, Morgan once again goes crazy, because even with Lori having interactions with him and such, it's still not going to stop him from acting like he did then. After that, Morgan and Carol have the same interaction that they did before, with Morgan telling Carol what really happened to Abraham and Glenn. and that Rick and them want to fight the Saviors and such. Then we cut to the hilltop, where the Saviors once again popped up there to look for Daryl, but this time, since the governor is around and he escaped too, they're looking for two people, and the governor's still in Alexandria, moving around from house to house, even up the outskirts, just to stay hidden, because he was persistent not to be left at the kingdom. We get a little reunion with Daryl, Beth, and Maggie, and them hiding from the Saviors. Back at Alexandria, Heath, since he went to Oceanside and discovered it instead of Tara, because she was still with Alicia before she was killed, and they were a couple, Heath is the one that went to Oceanside, and now comes clean about the whereabouts of Oceanside and what they have. And I actually, like I said before, threw Heath a little bone here, unlike the original series. Now, Rick and his group taking the guns from Oceanside and having their interactions with the people there pretty much play out the same, except Heath is the one to take the lead on the certain case, except besides Tara. Now, back at the sanctuary, Sasha, I feel, would still save Rosita's life by locking her out, so that way she would get captured alone by Negan and no one else had to. Negan, once again, like the original, meets her in her cell and says that she's going to help solve things with Rick and his people. Back at Alexandria, Dwight appears like he did before, and this time it's a lot less serious because Tara and Denise weren't a thing, so that little hate there that Daryl had for him in that aspect is gone. But Daryl, I feel, would still threaten him and attack him. It wouldn't be Tara this time, egging him on to try and kill him, because I feel that Daryl would still do this because of what Dwight did to him at the sanctuary and for betraying him. It all leads up to the Scavengers and Rick's group about to have an all-out war with the Saviors at the end of Season 7. And, lo and behold, the Scavengers turn on Rick and his people. And it's all revealed that they made an extra deal with Negan and the Saviors. Negan then makes his appearance known with Eugene and all the other Saviors, and Negan basically gives that whole speech and everything, making fun of Rick and such, except just with a lot more people included. He then states that Sasha is alive and in the casket which she was before. But, will this go the same way that it did before? Or will Rick's group actually have this more in the bag? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, we are getting into part 14 of What If Lori Survived. Last time, we left off with the Scavengers teaming up with Rick and his people at Alexandria, and lo and behold, betraying them for Negan. Leaving Negan, Eugene, and all the other Saviors to show themselves at the Alexandria gates and make themselves known like in the original story. With Negan ending off last episode's part saying that Sasha was here and alive, and that's where our story resumes. Now, in the original story, Farron and Michonne fought, with Michonne looking a little worse for wear after the whole thing was over. But this time, it would be Lori fighting against Farron, and something tells me that Lori would definitely win this fight a lot better than Michonne. Why is that? Well, Lori always seemed like the more perceptive one in a lot of more aspects than Michonne. True, Michonne was good with the blade, but Lori just had a knack for knowing certain things, so I think this would help her in that regard. Now, in regards to Sasha, she is let out of the casket, which she still gets put into, and she's actually alive. And because of this, she doesn't attack Negan, and nobody fires their guns. That is until the governor makes the mistake of showing himself right then and there and firing a shot from his pistol, because the governor was a good shot, even with one eye. And that causes everybody else of the group to start firing back. The shot rings, and it seems to have hit Negan right in his arm, right through his arm, like the palm of his arm, hit him there. And he drops Lucille, but only for a few seconds, and now he can't even carry a weapon in one of his other hands. He can only carry Lucille in one and let the other one try to heal. He corners Rick and Carl like he did before, and Rick still threatens to kill him again after Negan says he's going to kill Carl. Basically, all that goes down, except Negan does not have as much patience here because he just got shot through the friggin' hand. But just before he can attack Carl, the Kingdom and the Hilltop rescue the group right at that moment, and all hell breaks loose. But this time, Negan is in a lot more trouble because of his injured hand. And this time when he went to try and hit Carl, he could only really do it with one hand because his other hand hurt too much. He was shot through it. But at any rate, he and the other saviors that do end up surviving manage to escape back to the sanctuary, and Negan prepares the saviors for war, ending Season 7. Back at the main group, the beginning of Season 8, Rick, Ezekiel, and Maggie make their speeches as they did before, although this time aided by a few others. For one, Lori is there, and I think the governor would also participate in the speech too. Anyways, when all is said and done, we find the group at the sanctuary ready to attack it like they did before. But before Rick can start counting down and make his threat, the governor, once again showing his superiority, basically becoming like the Shane in regards to the group. If you really think about it so far, that's kind of what he's been. Takes a shot, but who does he shoot? Gregory. Why does the governor shoot Gregory, you might ask? Well, for one thing, the governor knew him already to be a scumbag, and that he wasn't worth protecting people's lives. And another, he teamed up with Negan, the guy who killed their friends. And for another thing, it's just, he knew that nobody else was going to do it, and he knew that Gregory would never change, so he figured he'd take his shot. Seeing this, Rick understanding after the governor explains why Gregory had to die, and no one really turning him down for doing that, Rick finds this the perfect opportunity to offer the saviors one more chance to surrender. They don't, and he does the countdown and opens fire. Few changes, though, from this scene in particular. For one thing, since Gregory is now dead, that means that Gabriel is not going to get left behind with Negan for trying to save Gregory. So that means he's also not going to lose part of his vision. And for another, that means that Negan is going to take even longer to get back into the sanctuary without a second person. And another thing, he is still shot through his hand, and that's going to make it a lot harder as well, because he's basically only going to be using one of his hands. But in the end, Negan does manage to get out, and he's looking a little worse for wear because he had to try a lot harder without Gabriel to get back, but he manages to make it back because Negan had a knack for that kind of stuff. Back at the satellite outpost, which we saw our group in the original go to, like Aaron and all them people, Eric sadly still dies. Little side note that wasn't really truly relevant, but for Aaron, it is. Jesus has to actually be the voice of reason for not just Morgan, well, not Morgan yet, but Morgan in the regards to this part of the saga, but also Tara, because she's still in a dark place after losing Alicia. Because remember, they were a couple since before Alexandria, because they actually got together. And since Arad killed her, that definitely leaves Tara to want to kill the Saviors. A lot more than Denise. Meanwhile, inside the satellite outpost, Rick comes face to face with Morales, like he did before. But Rick's not alone. Lori is not too far from him and encounters Morales too. And all three of them have a big talk, with Morales definitely being a lot less angry than before. He's definitely more in a mood to talk. So does this mean that with Lori's involvement, we could see Morales surviving? Daryl is not too far also. So, does this mean that Rick and Lori still have a chance to save Morales? Or will Daryl still kill Morales regardless and go against Rick like before? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, we are getting into part 15 of What If Lori Survived. We are nearing the end of the Savior arc, in which the last part ended with Rick meeting Morales again, except this time, there is going to be quite a significant amount of changes. For one thing, whenever Morales tries to hold Rick at gunpoint, Lori is there to back him up and try to calm the situation, in which is actually done a lot smoother because of the kind of person that Rick is now, being a lot calmer and more forgiving, and the fact that Daryl doesn't take the shot this time. For one thing, there's Rick and Lori both in the room who are handling it, and he is a much calmer person as Beth being alive. So, Morales actually gets to live here. And with his knowledge of most of the Saviors, for what we can infer anyways, since he died basically after we met him again, that will actually help the group out in time of need. Meanwhile, Jesus has the problem of Morgan going crazy and them getting into a fight, but it's a lot more problematic this time. Because Tara. Since Tara and Alicia, who I mentioned died a few parts back, were a couple basically dating back to when the governor was going to attack the prison again, and now she recently died to a rot, Tara is much darker because she had a much longer relationship with Alicia than she did with Denise. So she definitely is not in a good state of mind and actually backs Morgan up until he regains his state of mind, and then Jesus gets everything back in his favor. While that's going on, the whole deal with Ezekiel, Carol, and their people getting attacked by the Saviors, Ezekiel basically being held by the one Savior, all that goes per normal. Then we get to the scene where Rick and Daryl were about to fight over the whole plan of how to deal with the Saviors. But this time, the conversation is dealt a lot smoother because of the kind of people that the both of them are, even though they've done things, obviously, still. Lori's also there to make sure that nothing happens to Rick and Daryl and that they don't start anything, because God forbid they've had way too much violence already. They don't need to add on brotherly hate, because she even mentions in this that they've kind of formed a familiar brotherly bond. And Morales tries to get his end on this and explains that he knows ways to deal with the Saviors effectively from what he knows about them. Daryl, after hearing this, regains his actual tough composure and says that Morales is lucky to be alive because he joined with Negan and the Saviors. He betrayed their team after leaving them just to go to Birmingham. But ultimately, he relents and doesn't do anything rash. But he's still going to enact his plan, though, just behind their backs. Meanwhile, Rick still tries for a second time to go talk to Jadis and everything. Fails like before and gets captured, and that all goes per normal. Then we get to the scene where Carl would originally rescue Siddiq. And he still goes to do that. And it's still him, but he's accompanied by somebody. Lori. Lori decided to help Carl whenever she saw him trying to rescue Siddiq. Now, you would think that Lori would actually pull out a gun here, since she had a gun on her usually when she was around the zombies or walkers. But being alive as long as she's been, she's actually grown smart when it comes to being around them, like really smart. So she has a knife along with Carl to help protect him and Siddiq. So that means that Carl, still having two eyes by the way, doesn't get bit. But just because of this, that does not mean that everything's peaches and cream for our group. But I'll explain more on that soon. Meanwhile, there's not going to be the whole Tara and Daryl talk about Dwight, because for one thing, Tara and Denise weren't together, so that kind of takes away the whole prospect of both of them wanting to kill Dwight. So it's basically just Daryl. Now, the Saviors at the gate still get imprisoned there. They still get chained up to the gate. But Gregory isn't there, because if you guys did not watch the last part, he was offed by the governor because the governor saw fit to execute Gregory for what he did in turning on them. Meanwhile, at the sanctuary, Negan, Dwight, and Eugene, that whole plan with them trying to make sure that the workers are okay and everything else, that whole scene pretty much goes per normal. Going up to the events of the truck hitting the sanctuary, all thanks to Daryl and Tara, I feel still too. They wouldn't talk too much about Dwight, but they definitely would talk together about killing the Saviors. Let's just leave it at that. Aaron and Enid still have their trip to Oceanside, and a lot of the events after Siddiq gets rescued by Lori and Carl would pretty much play to their original standards. Then we get to something majorly important. The talk that Carl had with Negan at the gate. Well, that still happens. Why is that? Because you said that Carl did not get bit. Well, I would feel that Carl would still want to do this, regardless, because he had been around Negan a good bit. Where is Lori? And why isn't she at the gate with Carl leading on the speech? Well, like Michonne in the original, she had to help rescue everybody from basically being found out and murdered. But is this a little bit too convenient? What really happened during the rescue with Siddiq? And does it have something to do with Lori? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, I am bringing you guys What If Lori Survived Part 16. Now this one is going to have a lot of details and story, so get a snack, get a drink, and brace yourselves in for this episode, because this is going to be a handful. We recap the last episode with Carl giving the same speech to Negan. Now, I also covered that Laurie, taking the place of Michonne, while Michonne is also there, takes her place mainly, because she's still married to Rick, in getting everybody in the sewers to safety from Negan and the Saviors. Now, a bunch of you guys might have thought that this was a convenient way to take her apart from Carl after she just went with him to save Siddiq. Why is the true reason for that? Well, to put it simply, I am giving her Carl's death. Now, why am I doing that? Well, I figured that if Laurie was to die this time in this story, for it to have meaning and not just be dying from pregnancy. So, she gets bit instead of Carl. So, yeah, to put it simply. Anyways, I'm going to have more emotion tied to that. But before that, Rick and Negan are having their first duel, and Negan having been shot in the hand earlier by the governor gives him a little bit of a disadvantage, but the fight mainly plays out the same way that it did before. Now, when Rick gets into the sewers, he cannot believe what he is seeing. He then sees his wife on the ground and Carl standing above her. And then Laurie shows her bite wound and admits to both Rick and Carl that she was bit whenever her and Carl went to save Siddiq. And this is when Laurie gives her speech first to Carl, like she did before when she died of the pregnancy. Except now that Carl's basically a man, that speech is definitely altered to fit him more in that regard. And it is a very, very sad moment, even sadder than it was in her original death. Then she turns to Rick and says that, once again confessing for everything that she did and not being the better person earlier on, and she's definitely proud of the men both him and Carl have become. Then she says that she loves both of them and dies. This is the end of Laurie Grimes. Now, you guys might be thinking, well, since it's literally 3 minutes in, does this mean this is the story? This is your episode for today, Nick? Well, no. Just because Laurie is dead, how much influence she has had to everyone in the group means there is still plenty of story to cover. After this, Rick, being in his own thoughts, is delving into a deeper part of the sewer to just stew. Carl is basically just still by his mother's side whenever Ron steps up, who is still alive, by the way, and basically taunts Carl, saying this is a form of payback for him and Rick killing his dad. Because remember, Pete, that whole deal? Hearing this, and in a fit of blind rage, Carl does not hesitate. He pulls out his gun and shoots Ron square in the head, killing him instantly. Now, you guys might be thinking that Jesse is going to fight Carl, or there will be a whole yelling argument and just everything's gonna go to hell, basically. But you gotta put in retrospect, the kid just lost his mom, and Jesse sees kind of where Carl's coming from and kind of considers them even, because Jesse still has respect for the Grimes family, even though Rick and Jesse never got together. But while all that's going on, the whole deal with Gavin being killed by Henry, that whole attack on the kingdom and everything, plays out the same way that it did before. along with Simon going rogue and killing Jadis's people. I would say garbage people, but it's basically the same thing. Jadis's people, garbage people, you call whatever you want. And also fails to attack the hilltop, which those three events pretty much play the same way they did before, with maybe minor differences to maybe a few characters and such. But then we cut to the second Rick and Negan fight, in which Rick is full of bloodlust. He is not holding back a shred of his anger right now, especially after the death of Lori. He cannot believe that this has happened and feels that what Lori said is true. Negan needs to be taken down, especially after Glenn. Negan can't believe what is going on. Before, Rick was so much cooler and was easy to break, but this? He cannot believe how bloodlusted he is now and tries to interrogate it out of him during their little talk in the abandoned house. But Rick is not budging to fully explain himself. And once he finds Lucille, it is even harder for Negan to get it back, because Rick is just in that savage state of mind where whatever Negan tries to do, whatever Negan tries to say, whatever measures he tries to come up with, he is getting injured, tortured, and just completely ignored left, right, and center. And then Negan puts two and two together. Did his wife die? Because he knew that whenever he went insane after his wife's death, it's kind of playing itself back, haunting Negan, and he is barely able to get away. And when he is captured by Jadis, it is even harder for him to get away. Harder for him to plead his case because so much is running through his mind at once. He can't believe any of what's going on. And it is definitely hitting Negan harder than it did before. Meanwhile, the events at the hilltop of the people getting infected by the zombified arrows and such plays out the same way that it did before. Along with events afterwards, all going up to Rick and Morgan killing the Saviors, because Rick would definitely kill the Saviors here. Had Lori not died, they might have spared him maybe, except Morgan still killing Jared. But remember, Rick just lost Lori. He is not... That part of Officer Friendly is gone. Now, another big thing. Since Gregory is dead because the governor killed him at the sanctuary, that means that the whole argy-bargy with Gregory and Maggie, those small moments are gone. And also, it means that Dwight has to take measures into his own hands to go to the Alexandria and Hilltop communities to say the part of the plan about the Saviors and everything, basically help out Rick. And it's even harder for him this time. So, whenever Negan figures out Simon's treachery, it takes longer, and the season is extended because of Dwight not being there to basically kind of help him out in that regard. But Negan still finds out about Simon's treachery. Now, to cut to the actual Negan versus Simon fight, it is even harder for Negan this time, because 1, still injured from getting shot through the hand, 2, getting injured from Rick, because remember, bloodlusted Rick. But Negan still does pull through, but he is completely exhausted and barely able to see straight or stand. And he definitely thinks that he needs to recover himself before he actually goes out to stage revenge against Rick. But he still wants to do that. But some part of him isn't sure, because Rick just lost his wife, and then Negan calls back to losing his wife and how that made him feel. Does this mean that Negan will turn over a new leaf sooner? Or will he still go through with this plan despite how injured he is? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, I'm bringing you guys part 17 of What If Lori Survived. After this, we will have one more part to conclude this series, longest Walking Dead series as a whole that I have done so far. Definitely not what I was expecting from this character. Speaking of whom, we have lost Lori in the last episode, helping Carl save Sadiq, taking Carl's death, because I felt it the most appropriate to end her this time in a much more happy way that actually makes feeling for the character. Anyway, we are entering the Season 8 finale, in which Negan is very much so injured. Injured is kind of an understatement. He's been shot through the hand by the governor. He has been brutally attacked by Rick during their second battle. And to top that all off, he had to fight Simon, and Negan's going into this a lot more injured. But anyways, we now approach the Season 8 war between Rick's group and the Saviors. Now, everything leading up to this would play out the same, except Rick is far more bloodlusted and ready to kill Negan. And the governor isn't too far behind him because he was forced to do things from his past he didn't want to do. So when Eugene's betrayal of the Saviors rears its head, and Negan fires his weapon, and the hand that was shot through, words cannot describe the amount of pain he is in. He is angry, confused, upset. Eugene was his last chance to prove that everything he had went through was actually worth something, and it just had to show that he betrayed him and the Saviors. And Negan can't really do anything because he's in so much pain. But he doesn't have time to think this through to the fullest, because Rick, accompanied by the governor, go forth and attack him. And this is where they start just punching, kicking, shooting, stabbing, basically just torturing Negan, because they don't just want to kill him, the two of them, especially Rick. They want to make him suffer before he dies. The governor especially on the suffering, but Rick, because he just lost Lori, and Negan also knows this, tries to find one final way to plead his case, finally seeing the light a lot earlier on, but it's too late. And soon after, the Saviors are the next kind of threat to deal with, because after Negan's dead, what are they going to do with them? The governor answers that question for everybody, gunning them all down and making a very reminiscent flashback to whenever he murdered his people from Woodbury, if you guys remember that particular scene. But with that, the threat of the Saviors as a whole is over. And none of them, except the ones at the hilltop, are alive. Now, as for Rick and Carl, they're going to be going down a far different path way later on in the series, since Lori died way later. And they know they have to stay strong to protect Judith and the rest of their family. And as for the sanctuary, it would remain barren to this very day, because there would be a time skip, because no more Saviors, there's no point in keeping that place around anymore. Now, as for the bridge, this is still going to become apparent since all the Saviors are dead, except the ones at the hilltop. We're still going to have them, like Alden and those people. And there are a lot of survivors from the old group and a lot of people that have survived as a whole. So the bridge problem's not going to be too noticeable. As for Carl and Enid, as of many in my stories, they're going to actually pursue a relationship. But it's kind of back and forth since Carl just lost his mom, like before Negan's death. So it's hard to keep that relationship balanced. Now, as for Ken, just a quick side note, since Gregory died way earlier on in season 8, that means that with how many people are in the group, they would be able to protect Ken, so Earl's not going to attack Maggie because Gregory kind of swayed that. As for the people on the bridge, it would go a lot smoother with, like I said, a lot of survivors from the old group, and no Justin or any other saviors to muck it up, so to speak. So the Horde would be safely diverged, and everything would be aces. Far too good to be true for some of you, I'm guessing, but it's just how I feel it would go, even without the saviors, because Justin's the main, reason that herd was a problem. Which also means that Aaron would keep both of his arms. So that's just another quick side note. Now, as for Jadis, I discussed this in one, if not two, of my stories, that even though Justin isn't around, and the Saviors, there's no one to suspect like Oceanside killing the Saviors or whoever else, that means that Jadis would likely take matters into her own hands to find someone to trade to get into the city, which in turn would cause her to get killed. Definitely this time by Rick or the Governor, considering their character development. We then get a 6-year time skip like before, and the entrance to Magna and her group, and them being rescued. This time, once again, by Judith. We actually get to see Judith as a whole, and since Lori died kinda when Judith had some kind of memory, because I recall Judith having some memory of Carl, so I feel that she would have some memory of her mom, so one could argue she maybe looks a little different, so to speak, but I see her looking the same, but still getting the hat passed down from Carl, because, like I said, after he just recently kinda lost his mom, and it's a back and forth between Enid and stuff, he still feels that it's time to pass down the hat. Now, we get into the entrance of the Whisperers, and Eugene and Rosita having their incident like before. Henry and Carol coming from the kingdom, and many of the events I feel would play out the same, except with a lot more characters from before being alive still. Rick, in particular, is still around, and a found leader of Alexandria, and definitely showing his worth when it comes to leadership and whatnot, because Lori dying so much later on is definitely a big change for everyone seeing, Rick's character and such. And as for the Governor, him and Lily have actually had a few children in this time, and we actually see the Governor rocking a full-on beard and looking a little bit grayish in the hairs, and kind of resembling Rick in that regard, because the Governor's been around for a long time, along with everybody else. Now, as for the Hilltop, I feel that Maggie or someone would still be a high leader there, because Gregory, once again, died way earlier on. Now, as for Elijah and his friends, the people that Maggie met with whenever she left because Negan was still alive, I'm afraid that, I also discussed this, and I think What If Amy Survived, that they would likely die to the Reapers without Maggie being there. Soon enough, the threat of the Whisperers, little as it might seem, is slowly but surely becoming apparent, and I feel that Daryl would still take his stead in helping Jesus and Aaron find Eugene and Rosita. Sadly, when we get into the actual entrance of the Whisperers, Jesus is still the one to die fighting them. At that moment, Rick leads the stead, accompanied by Michonne and a few others, Michonne becoming even more apparent now, and leading the stead and helping everybody else get out of there. And by the time we get to the bridge sequence, Rick is there along with Daryl and possibly still Michonne, if not Tyrese also, because remember, they're alive. I feel that they would still get Lydia and put her in the cage, even though Rick's character development has changed so drastically like later in the show. So Lydia would still be captured. But here's where we end things. How will the threat of Alpha go this time around? Will it actually be really easy with the characters? Or will things turn dark for our group? Hey guys, it is Nick here with another Nick's Topics Walking Dead What If topic video for you guys today. And today, I am bringing you guys the finale, part 18 of What If Lori Survived. This has to be my longest Walking Dead What If to date. Hope that you guys have enjoyed it so far and are looking forward to this finale. It won't be action-packed or anything, but it will be a nice episode and end to What If Lori Survived, and a good many plot points to finish off the story. So let us begin. Lori herself, I have changed from a know-it-all, basically hateful character, and I've actually turned her into someone who you would actually like. But sadly, a few parts ago, helping Carl save Sadiq, she has died. So let's recap with the last episode to where we left our story. The entrance into the Whisperer arc, and Rick, Michonne, and Daryl leading the charge on the bridge and capturing Lydia like before, because I feel that would happen regardless, even if Lori was lost, like, I don't know, sometime recent. She's still interrogated by Daryl, because I feel that that would still happen. And a lot of those plot points and stuff would go per normal. Until we hit the point where Luke and Alden are shown to be taken hostage. Because I feel that since the saviors from the hilltop were still alive, and yeah, I feel that they would be held hostage regardless. We then get into the entrance of Alpha and the Whisperers. Alpha claiming that she wants her daughter Lydia back. Now, it's a lot different than my What If Amy Survived, because Luke and Alden are actually held hostage. And instead of, like, Luke just being held hostage, or no one being held hostage at all. Now, since Rick, Michonne, Daryl, the governor, and a lot of leaders are there this time, this actually makes things easier on the fact of not wanting Lydia to go with Alpha. And once Rick and several other leaders make this known, Alpha doesn't take too kindly to this, saying that she has not come here for conflict, but if they refuse to give her her daughter, then there will be conflict. And the governor, having just about enough of this lady and her threats and whatnot, hearing all this before, gets his favorite machine gun type gun and effectively kills Alpha and all the Whisperers there. Now, I know this is kind of reminiscent to my What If Amy Survived so far, which is kind of what this is going to be, yet not. Because it's the governor and not just the whole hilltop colony shooting down the Whisperers. And another thing, like I said, Luke and Alden are still held hostage, and the fact that if you think the governor would still somehow, maybe even accidentally shoot the both of them, with how much time he spent around Rick and his family, I don't think that the two of them would die, and that the governor would know not to accidentally or purposely kill them. So, like before, after Alpha and the Whisperers have been shot down by the governor, and the governor only, the whole hilltop prepares for a possible re-attack by more from the Whisperer's army, especially after what Lydia has told Beta and the rest of the Whisperers and Alpha's horde. Beta and everybody else in the Whisperer clan eventually finding out about Alpha's death and several of the Whisperers. Beta then takes up the mantle of Alpha, leads a charge with the rest of the Whisperers and the horde, and makes it straight for the Hilltop Colony. Now, as I said, this is reminiscent to my What If Amy Survived, but honestly, from what the story had gone with so far, I didn't see another way around just making it like this again. But don't worry, it's not all going to be the exact same if you guys have not already seen so far. So, it's not going to be like all the same, obviously, because another thing, Amy is not here. So, before I get into that too much, let's get back to the story plot. Beta, like before, encounters Tyrese, and unlike before whenever Beta and Tyrese fought, Tyrese has actually been around Michonne a lot. Like, a lot. Because remember, like the comics, they're together. So, some part of me wants to believe that if this were to occur, Tyrese would stand a much better chance against Beta. But even if that were the case, I don't see him inevitably beating Beta at all. So, sadly, Tyrese still falls here to the likes of Beta. But Amy and Beth aren't the two to encounter him like before. The first is Sasha. Now, you guys might think this is just, like, obviously just putting that out there because Sasha's Tyrese's sister, but you'll see more why I did this. Before Sasha can even fire a shot, Michonne also comes in. And once she sees Tyrese, her husband on the floor dead because of this guy, oh boy, bring back old Michonne here. And with her rage, her sword, and her cunning, Beta stands no chance against this. And it would have been nice to see like a Michonne type Beta match, but we never actually got that. It was always just either Daryl or one of the side characters, because all the main characters just kept getting either split off or killed. Anyways, Beta stands no chance against this, and him and ultimately all of the Whisperers and the Horde are dealt with. Now, like I said, you might think that me putting in Michonne and Sasha was inevitably just throwing it in there because they're related, but it seemed like a good plot point to not keep the story the same from before, and obviously it wouldn't have been the same rather than just putting Beth in there because Amy's dead. Now, after this, we then hit a little stub here, because I feel that with Rick and Michonne being around, that means the Reapers would be dealt with a lot more smoothly, especially since Leah and Daryl would never meet. Now, once we hit the Commonwealth, that is going to be dealt with a lot more smoother as well, with several leaders still being alive, and Michonne now in a dark path. So something tells me that Lance and his people would still ultimately get killed, along with Sebastian, maybe. Now, that's another thing. Since Deanna, I feel, would still inevitably be around, albeit hitting her definite old ages, and we did get a plot point of Deanna and Pamela knowing each other, we could argue that Deanna and Pamela would actually get along here, and that Pamela wouldn't get locked up and leave people to die and ultimately do that. So, one could argue that the Commonwealth would ultimately, there wouldn't be any conflict there, except maybe from Lance. But that's up to you guys to decide. Other than that, that ends off our story of what if Lori survived her pregnancy and became a good character. And that's where we end things. Now, I sincerely hope that you guys have enjoyed this series, my longest Walking Dead What If series to date. And I hope that you guys aren't too disappointed with the way that this finale turned out. I tried to make it the best that I possibly could with the little bit of story progression that there was. But ultimately, from What If Amy Survived, I didn't see too much changing, besides rehashing the story from before. But I sincerely hope that you guys still enjoyed this finale, and hope that you guys are looking forward to the next What If topic, which will be a Dragon Ball one, but that will be telling. Like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.